He held up the floppy-eared bunny and beamed. Grandma gave him to me. I froze. My childhood, my memories, gifted away without a word. But I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just smiled and wrote a letter that would haunt my mother for years. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever watched someone give away a piece of your soul like it meant nothing, then buckle up. This isn't just a story about toys. It's about memory, identity, and the most poetic revenge I could have imagined. Subscribe and stay with me until the end, because sometimes the quietest revenge echoes the loudest. My childhood wasn't picture perfect. Not the kind you see on old VHS tapes or framed in golden light on a living room shelf. There were arguments, raised voices muffled behind bedroom doors, a quiet ache in the silence after slammed cabinets and whispered fights. I was a shy, awkward kid, never quite knowing where to place myself in the chaos. But there were these tiny, shining islands of happiness. Saturday mornings, in my superhero pajamas, cereal bowl in lap, cartoons blaring, sun-drenched afternoons spent building Lego castles in the living room, while the world outside moved too fast for me to understand. And there was Mr. Wiggles. He wasn't just a stuffed bunny. He was a witness. His left ear was always bent. His fur, once snowy white, had turned a warm, worn-out brown from all the hugs and whispered secrets. When the chickenpox kept me home alone, I curled up with Mr. Wiggles as The Land Before Time played in the background. When I heard the dull thud of my dad slamming the front door and my mom crying softly in the bathroom, it was Mr. Wiggles I held close. I was 7 when I made a promise, one only a child could make with such reverence. "I'll keep you forever," I whispered into his worn-out fur. "Even when I'm old and big, you'll always be mine." And I believed that. I truly did. Years passed. Childhood slipped into the rear view. Acne, first heartbreak, college, rent, real life. But my mother had always promised me that those treasures, as she called them, would stay safe in the attic, neatly packed in boxes, labeled in her perfect handwriting. Legos, complete sets, Hot Wheels, track and cars, dinosaur figures, stuffed animals. It was like a shrine to a boy who never quite fit in anywhere else. And I, foolishly perhaps, trusted that shrine would be mine again someday. Maybe when I had kids. Maybe when I just needed to remember who I used to be. Sometimes I'd sneak up there during visits, just stand there. Dust motes floating in the slanted attic sunlight. The air smelling like old wood and childhood. I'd run my fingers over the boxes, pick up a Lego figure or a dinosaur, and feel 7 again. But memories aren't safe, not really. It was Thanksgiving, the kind that starts off warm and nostalgic. The the smell of cinnamon, the clink of wine glasses, the rustle of coats being hung in the hallway. I arrived at Mom's house with a bottle of wine and a pumpkin pie. My sister Emma was already there with her husband Craig and their tornado of a son, Oliver. He was 8, all teeth and noise. He hugged me tight and squealed, "Uncle," like I was Santa Claus. And then I saw it. Clutched in his sticky little hands, bouncing as he ran, was Mr. Wiggles. I stopped. Everything else blurred. The laughter, the voices, the clatter of silverware. Mr. Wiggles. My Mr. Wiggles. Where did you get that? I managed to ask, my voice cracking in ways I hated. Oliver grinned proudly. Grandma gave him to me. She said he used to be yours, but now he's mine. I turned to my mother, who was calmly basting a turkey in the kitchen like nothing had just shattered. Mom? My voice sharpened. She barely looked up. Oh, he just loves that old thing. You weren't using it anymore. My chest tightened. Not using it? Toys are meant to be played with, sweetheart, she said, casually. And he's so happy. Look! Oliver bounced Mr. Wiggle, and I felt hollow. It wasn't about a toy. Not really. It was about everything that toy represented. That weekend was a nightmare in slow motion. Every room in my mom's house had become a museum of my childhood, but not for me. Oliver's bedroom, his room at Grandma's, was lined with my memories. My Legos, half assembled and missing pieces. My dinosaurs, lined up on the windowsill. My Hot Wheels, battered and chipped from new battles I hadn't been there to witness. And my mother, she was glowing, beaming with pride, sipping wine and saying things like, "It's so wonderful to see those toys finally being loved again." I wanted to scream, to shake her, to make her understand. They were already loved. They were mine. You had no right. But I didn't scream. I excused myself, stepped onto the porch, and let the cold November air bite into my lungs. Driving home that Sunday, my hands gripped the steering wheel so tight, my knuckles ached. I kept seeing Oliver's smile, hearing my mother's laugh. I wasn't angry. I was erased. As if the boy I once was had never mattered. As if the years I spent whispering secrets to Mr. Wiggles on lonely nights had simply been recycled for someone more lovable. That's when the idea came. Not rage, not screaming matches or guilt trips. No, something quieter, a drop of poison in the middle of their happy little narrative. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator, the only sound in the room. The paper sat in front of me, blank and waiting. ... And I began to write. Dear Oliver, I wanted to give you something very special this year. Dear Oliver, I wanted to give you something very special this year. The words spilled slowly, every sentence sharpened with intent. This wasn't a tantrum. This was precision. The kind of revenge that didn't explode. It lingered. You've been such a bright spot in Grandma's life, and I want to make sure that when I'm no longer here, you are taken care of." I smiled faintly as I wrote that line. To Oliver, it would sound like generosity. To my mother, it would feel like a knife slid between the ribs. Quiet. Clean. The next sentence: "I am leaving everything I own to you. My savings, my home, my collections. Grandma and Aunt Emma will make sure you receive them when you're old enough. I know you'll treasure them just like you treasure the toys I gave you." Perfect. A gentle echo of her own logic. If my childhood was just old stuff to be gifted away, then my life, my future, could be handed off just as easily. No warning, no ceremony. I signed the letter, "Love, Uncle, my name." Then I folded it with care, slipped it into a plain envelope, and scrawled in neat handwriting, "To Oliver." I placed the letter in a small gift box. On top of it, I added a little red toy car I bought from a dollar store. Something cheap but shiny, just enough to distract him from the real present beneath. I wrapped the box. I waited. Christmas came like a test. Snow flurried against the windshield as I parked outside my mother's house. Lights sparkled on the porch. Inside, I could already hear laughter, the curated, too loud kind that families use when things are supposed to be fine. Dot. "Look who's here!" Mom called when I stepped through the door. Oliver came barreling toward me. He still had Mr. Wiggles. Only now, the once pristine bunny was matted and stained. One eye was half detached. His ear hung looser than before, like even his floppy defiance had given up. I swallowed hard. "Hey, buddy," I said, ruffling his hair. "Got something special for you." I handed him the wrapped box. He tore it open on the living room floor, surrounded by ribbons and flashing lights. The car came out first. "Cool," he shouted. Then he noticed the envelope underneath. "A letter?" "Read it out loud," I said, keeping my voice casual. He unfolded it. The room got quiet, like movie quiet. Oliver's young voice rang out, sweet and clear. "Dear Oliver, I wanted to give you something very special this year." Mom turned sharply from the kitchen. "You've been such a bright spot in Grandma's life." Emma stiffened. "I am leaving everything I own to you," Oliver gasped. "No." "Everything? Even your TV?" I smiled. "Even my TV?" Craig gave an awkward laugh. Emma stared daggers. My mother froze. The wine glass in her hand tilted slightly. She didn't blink. Oliver went on reading. "I know you'll treasure them, just like you treasure the toys I gave you. Love, Uncle." He held it up proudly, like a trophy. "I'm rich now." He ran toward Craig. "I get all of Uncle's stuff." Craig bent down. Wow, buddy. Let's maybe talk about it later." Mom cleared her throat, visibly rattled. "Oliver, sweetheart, why don't you go put the letter somewhere safe?" "But why?" he asked. "Uncle said it's mine." I turned to her, my voice honey-sweet and venom-laced. "Kids love surprises, don't they?" She didn't respond. Her lips were tight, her eyes glassy. Perfect. The next day, I got the call. "What the hell was that?" Mom's voice crackled with restrained fury. What was what? I asked, calmly pouring coffee into a chipped mug. The letter. You can't just promise everything you own to a child like that. Why not? I said, nonchalant. You already promised him my past. I figured I'd give him my future too. Silence. The silence of someone being confronted with a truth they can't deny. Only resent. You're being cruel, she said, her voice tight. I'm being consistent, I replied. She hung up, and I smiled. That letter worked like a slow-release toxin. A single page folded in half, echoing across weeks and months. Emma texted me in February. Oliver won't stop telling people he's inheriting everything. Mom's freaking out. You need to clarify it's not real. I didn't. Craig called in March. Man, you gotta help us out. Oliver told his teacher he'll be a millionaire soon. It's getting weird. I just said, kids have wild imaginations, huh? They didn't know what to do with that. Because the beauty of the letter wasn't just in the sting. It was in the ambiguity. There was no threat, no outright lie, just implication. And it unraveled their perfect little dynamic, thread by thread. One morning in April, I woke up to a voicemail from Mom. Her voice was softer, strained. I've been thinking, maybe I shouldn't have given away your things without asking. I thought you didn't care. I see now I was wrong. She paused. I'm sorry. I didn't call back right away. Not out of cruelty, but because I needed to feel that moment. She had finally seen me, not as a background character, not as the awkward, someone who remembered, someone who could bleed. By summer, the story of the letter had taken on a mythic quality in our family. Oliver, in all his innocent confidence, had apparently created full fantasies at school about what he'd buy with my money. His teacher called Emma. Emma called Mom. Mom called me. And I let it ride. Because for the first time in my life, they were talking about me. Not as a burden, not as an afterthought, but as a person of consequence. And in a way, that letter became the most valuable thing I'd ever given. Thanksgiving came again. I brought the same pie, the same wine, but this time, the air was different. Oliver didn't greet me with a squeal or Mr. Wiggles in hand. He stood near the doorway, hands behind his back, shy smile on his face. Hey, Uncle, he said, hugging me briefly. Hey, champ. Dinner was quiet, tense. At some point, over pie, Mom cleared her throat and said, I went through the attic. My fork paused. I put all your things in a cedar chest for you, so they'll be safe until you want them. Craig and Emma kept their eyes on their plates. I just nodded. Thanks, Mom. For the first time in years, something between us softened. A week later, Craig showed up at my apartment with the cedar chest. He didn't say much, just helped me carry it in and left. When I opened it, I saw Mr. Wiggles. A little more threadbare, a little more tired, but whole. My Lego sets, carefully bagged. My dinosaurs, my Hot Wheels, even my old comic books. And in Mr. Wiggles' arms was an envelope. I opened it. I saved these for you. I should have always saved them for you. Thank you for loving me enough to make me see my mistakes. I sat on the floor, surrounded by my ghosts, and wept. Not out of pain, but out of release. The letter in the cedar chest felt heavier than paper. It felt like time had bent in on itself. Like somehow, through all the silence, guilt, and forgotten birthdays, my mother had finally written me the letter I had needed all those years ago. A simple note that said, "I see you now. But here's the thing about wounds that have healed badly. Even when someone bandages them, the scar remains." I didn't hate her. I didn't want revenge anymore, but I couldn't pretend that the past hadn't happened either. And oddly enough, neither could she. Christmas was approaching again. Mom called early in December and asked, "Will you come this year?" "I've come every year," I replied. She sighed. "I mean really come." I knew what she meant, so I did. I came early. I helped decorate. I even let Oliver pick the tree with me. He chose the biggest one on the lot, of course. We tied it to my car, laughing the whole way back, and sang. He was taller now, still loud but sweeter, and surprisingly thoughtful. "Uncle," he said one night while we were stringing lights, "remember when you said I'd get all your stuff?" "Yeah," I said carefully. "I don't need it anymore," he said. "I just want you to be around forever." I stared at him. This kid, this sponge of joy and chaos, was the same one who once clutched Mr. Wiggles like a hostage and threw tantrums over my old toy box. But now he was saying something so pure, it felt like it echoed. "You got me now," I said. He grinned. "Cool. Can we build Legos after this?" That night, after he went to bed, I found Mom sitting in the living room. Just the tree lights were on. She was holding Mr. Wiggles in her lap, stroking its floppy ears. "He loved this rabbit," she said softly. "You gave it away," I reminded her. "I know," she said, not defensively, just knowing. At the time, she looked at me. I was wrong. The words came out like they had been practicing. "I didn't know how to parent you when you got sick. And after your dad left, I just closed parts of myself off. It was easier to pretend certain things didn't matter." "You mean like my feelings?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "Yes, like your feelings. Like you." The rawness of that hit me. Because rarely, so rarely, do people admit that kind of thing out loud. "I didn't need you to be perfect," I said. "I just needed you to notice." "I know," she whispered. "I notice now." The next morning, I saw her standing outside the attic with a notebook. "What's that?" I asked. "I'm documenting what's in storage," she said, "in case something ever happens to me." She turned and looked at me very intentionally. "I want you to handle things when I'm gone, not Emma." That startled me. "What? Why?" "Because you see the whole picture," she said. "Emma only sees herself." That was an earthquake-level shift. Not because I wanted her inheritance. I didn't. But because for the first time, she trusted me with something more than errands or awkward family photos. She was giving me the steering wheel. I kept thinking about that letter to Oliver, how it started as a weapon, a poetic strike, but now it had turned into something else. It had become a mirror. It made everyone in the family confront themselves, not with rage, but with reflection. Craig and Emma grew quiet around me, not hostile, just unsure. They hadn't realized until then that I could shake their foundation with a single sheet of paper. It changed how they treated me. Emma started texting occasionally, cautiously, asking about my job, about whether I was dating anyone. Craig invited me to poker night with his friends. Was it guilt? Maybe. But I didn't care, and I hadn't had to scream to be seen. I had just written a letter. Years passed. Slowly, the wounds that had once defined us became outlines instead of active pains. Oliver grew up. He still kept Mr. Wiggles, though now it sat on a high shelf next to his sports trophies and a framed photo of me and him building Legos. I got promoted, bought a little cabin an hour out of town, spent weekends there, reading, hiking, and sometimes writing stories that I never showed anyone. And then, Mom died. It was quiet, peaceful, lung failure in her sleep. She left behind a note for me. You are not forgotten anymore. At the will reading, I expected awkwardness. I expected Emma to protest, maybe even demand explanations. But what I didn't expect was that the real letter, the one that carried the most weight, wasn't from the lawyer. It was from Oliver. He handed it to me after the service, cheeks red, hands trembling. I wrote this a few years ago, he said. I wanted to give. I opened it. Dear Uncle, you gave me everything when I was too young to understand it. Your toys, your stories, even your silence. That letter you wrote me when I was little, I still have it. It's in my drawer. I didn't really get what it meant back then, but I do now. You weren't giving me your stuff. You were giving me your pain, and you trusted me with it. I hope I've earned that trust. I love you, Oliver. I cried harder than I had in years, because he did earn it. Not just my trust, but something deeper. The ability to rewrite the ending of a painful story. Sometimes revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it doesn't even look like revenge at all. It looks like a letter. It feels like a conversation that never would have happened without it. It reshapes people, quietly, permanently. I didn't destroy my family. I redefined it. And in doing so, I didn't just heal myself. I healed the boy who once lost Mr. Wiggles to a tantrum. I healed the man who once stood in the attic, surrounded by ghosts of a childhood no one thought was sacred. And most importantly, I became the kind of person whose silence carried more weight than anyone's shouting ever could. The room fell into an eerie quiet as the lawyer adjusted his glasses and began reading the will. Everyone was there. Emma, Craig, their kids, a few distant relatives, even some of my mother's church friends. But all eyes flickered between me and the folder in the lawyer's hands. They knew something was coming. They just didn't know what. Mom had made it clear I would be the executor of her estate. But that didn't mean I knew what she'd written. I had honored her request to stay out of the final draft. This was her last word, not mine. And yet, it carried my voice. It echoed everything I had taught her through silence. The lawyer began. To my daughter Emma, I leave my diamond necklace, my wedding china, and the antique mirror from my dressing room. The things she always admired, and the beauty she always chased. Emma smiled softly, a little smug, but her eyes darted toward me. To my son Craig, I leave my collection of vinyls and Dad's fishing gear. So he remembers that peace isn't something you inherit, it's something you learn. Craig gave a nod. No complaints. Then came the pause. I saw it coming. The storm. The shift. The moment where years of overlooked birthdays, casual cruelty, and misplaced favoritism would finally collect their interest. The lawyer cleared his throat. And to my grandson Oliver, everyone leaned forward. Oliver looked confused. I leave the rest of my estate, the house, the savings account, the stocks, and everything else not otherwise mentioned. Emma froze, but the lawyer held up a hand, continuing, "This is not because he is my youngest, or because he asked. It is because he changed me." It was like someone had opened a trap door under Emma and Craig. Emma looked stunned, then panicked. "But he's a child," she hissed. "He doesn't even know what any of that means." The lawyer replied calmly, "Which is why his legal guardian, until he turns 25, is named in the will." A pause. His uncle, me, they all turned to stare. I didn't smile. I didn't smirk or gloat. I simply sat still, letting it wash over me like rain on a rooftop. Because this was the moment, the true revenge. Not cruel, not loud, poetic. She had given everything to the one person who never asked for it, and trusted me, the boy she once ignored, to carry it forward. I wasn't the angry kid in the attic anymore. I was the steward of legacy, and Emma stormed out of the room. Halfway through the reading, Craig sat frozen, blinking rapidly, like someone trying to wake from a bad dream. Only Oliver looked at peace. He turned to me and whispered, "Does this mean I have to mow the lawn now?" I laughed. "You might have to own the lawn." That night, I walked through the old house one last time. I stood in the attic again, the room where I had once written a letter meant to cut. And instead, something bad happened. That letter had sewn everything back together. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Enough to turn a childhood ache into an adult responsibility. Enough to turn a neglected boy into the man his mother trusted most. I found a box near the back, labeled "For You." Inside, more letters. Not legal ones, not formal, just thoughts. My mother's thoughts. Some were apologies she never said out loud. Others were little memories I thought she'd forgotten. Your 7th birthday. When I forgot the cake, you pretended not to care. But I saw you cry. Later in the yard, I never forgave myself for that. I watched you hold your chemo pills like they were poison. You never asked for help. I didn't know how to offer it. You were always brave, even when I wasn't. I read each one with trembling hands, because they weren't written for revenge. They were written for redemption. In the months that followed, I moved into the house. Not permanently, but enough to keep it from falling quiet. I redecorated the attic, turned it into a writing room, hung Mr. Wiggles in a little shadow box with a plaque, to the boy who remembered when no one else did. Oliver visited every weekend. We planted tomatoes, built a birdhouse, fixed the loose railing on the porch, and sometimes, just sometimes, we read old letters together. Because that's the thing about stories. They hurt less when you share them. And revenge, true revenge, isn't about taking something back. It's about taking control of the narrative. My mother didn't give me an apology when I was young, but she gave me something better before she died. The last word. And sometimes that's all the justice you ever need. Time, it turns out, is the best editor. It trims what doesn't matter. It highlights what does. And in the years since the will was read, since the dust of old wounds finally settled, that house became more than a legal asset. It became a home again. Oliver grew fast. Too fast. One minute we were fixing his bike chain. The next he was taller than me, with a voice that cracked like thunder, and a heart as soft as wet earth. He called me Unc. Never uncle, never guardian, just Unc. We built a new tradition, he and I. Every Sunday, pancakes, jazz, and an hour of silence. Not awkward silence, peaceful silence. He'd sketch in his notebook. I'd write in mine. Sometimes he asked about the past, about my parents, about Emma. I never spoke ill of her. That was part of the revenge, too. Choosing not to stain him with my scars. But he knew. He always knew. Children sense pain, even when you hide it behind smiles and sarcasm. One Sunday, when he was about 16, he placed a small envelope on the table. "What's this?" I asked. "A school essay," he shrugged. "We had to write about the bravest person we know." I opened it, and I swear, my hands shook more than they had the day I read my mother's will. My uncle had cancer, but that's not why he's brave. He's brave because he lost everything: his health, his parents, his place in the family, and still came back to raise a kid who wasn't his, in a house that held more ghosts than furniture. He never made me feel like a burden, never made anyone pay for what he went through. He taught me that silence can be stronger than shouting, and love doesn't have to be loud to be real. He showed me what legacy means: not money, not property, but the choice to do right even when no one's watching. That night, I sat in the attic, the same attic where I once drafted a letter to cut someone out. Now, I held a letter that stitched me back together. The cycle had flipped, and in that moment, I realized revenge wasn't what I thought it was. It wasn't fire. It wasn't fury. It was forgiveness with a backbone. It was giving someone nothing, no access, no energy, until they disappeared from the story. And Emma never spoke to me again after the will. I heard she tried to contest it, failed. Then she moved cities, rebranded her life. She never called Oliver, never sent a card. That absence, it became her final word. Her silence said more than any apology ever could. And for once, I didn't need closure. I was the closure. When Oliver turned 25, the estate legally became his. We celebrated quietly. Dinner, a jazz record, and a long walk around the house. He didn't move out, said he wanted to fill the place with better memories. So we did, room by room, ghost by ghost. Years later, when I knew my time was nearing, I left one more envelope in the attic. Not a will, not a legal document, just a story. Our story. The one you're hearing now. Because stories matter, especially the ones that hurt, especially the ones that begin with betrayal and end in legacy. They teach us that sometimes the best revenge is becoming everything they said you couldn't be. Oliver read the letter after I was gone. He turned the attic into a small library, hung my old notebooks on the wall, framed the last letter with a note beneath it that read, "He didn't just survive, he rewrote the ending." And maybe, just maybe, that's all any of us ever want. To be remembered not for what hurt us, but for how we healed anyway.